I've been supporting my recently single friend all week, but when I came back, my husband started to get suspicious. Who would have thought that comforting a friend could threaten my marriage? It's truly heartbreaking. I never imagined things would go so wrong. If I hadn't gone to visit my friend, maybe things would have been different. But at that moment, I couldn't just leave Oliver like that. He needed me, and I had to be there for him before things got any worse. My name is Mia, and my husband's name is Owen. We've been married for a year. Owen is the kind of guy who always knows how to make you laugh, and he's also serious when it comes to our relationship. We both believe in honesty, fairness, and trust. Everything was going smoothly until that weekend. Just one Friday night changed everything. After Owen got home from work, I had dinner ready. I'd been home all day, just lounging on the sofa, scrolling through my phone. After welcoming my husband, I placed the meal on the table, ready to eat, when my phone rang. It was Oliver. I was a bit surprised because he was calling at this hour. I picked up, and at first there was an eerie silence. Then I heard shaky breathing, and suddenly he started crying. Oliver wasn't the type to cry. He was always calm, so hearing him like this completely broke my heart. I kept calling his name, trying to get him to talk, but he couldn't. His voice was choked a few times, like he was about to say something, but nothing came out before the call ended. No explanation, no goodbye, just silence before the call was cut off. I stared at the phone, completely panicked, my mind racing with thoughts of what could have gone wrong. What happened? Was he okay? Did something terrible just happen? Before I could call him back, my phone rang again. It was a message from Oliver. "She's gone. I can't do this anymore." At that moment, I knew exactly what had happened. He was devastated after breaking up with his fiancée, someone he'd been with for years. I couldn't even imagine how crushed he must have felt. I rushed into the bedroom and began changing my clothes. Oliver's message had completely shocked me. When my husband came out of the bathroom, he looked at me curiously and asked where I was going. "Oh, and my friend is really struggling right now. He just broke up with his fiancée. I need to go see him," I explained. He paused for a moment, then asked if I really had to go and if I could talk to him on the phone instead. He didn't say no, but simply asked, "Is it that serious?" I understood that Owen wanted me to stay, but I knew Oliver needed me more right now. I couldn't leave him alone in this situation. Oliver and I had been friends for so long, from high school to college, and he had always been there for me when I needed help. Now, when he needed me, I had to be there for him, even if it upset Owen. Owen sighed. He didn't stop me, but he just wanted me to be back in time for dinner. I promised him I would be back soon, just a quick check-in. My heart was torn, but I knew I had to go. He needed me right now. I grabbed my bag, kissed Owen on the cheek, and left. But as I thought about Oliver's message, I couldn't help but feel even more worried. You don't hear someone you care about breaking down like that every day. I just needed to make sure he was okay. When I arrived at Oliver's house, I knocked on the door. There was no response. I knocked harder this time, but still nothing. My heart started racing, panicked with worry. I prayed and hoped he hadn't done anything foolish. I pulled out my phone and called him one last time, louder this time, and finally heard the door open. Oliver cracked the door just enough for me to see his face. And oh my God, he looked terrible. His eyes were red and swollen, dark circles under them, as though he had been crying for hours. He didn't even say anything. He just turned and walked inside, leaving the door open for me. When I stepped in, I couldn't believe my eyes. The place was a complete mess. Calling it a mess was an understatement. It looked like a madman had been living here. There were pizza boxes and leftover food piled everywhere. Empty bottles scattered on the floor, mostly alcohol, dirty clothes thrown over chairs, and an awful stench. I could barely stand the smell, like something had been left out too long. This was a huge shock because Oliver was usually very neat. He was the kind of guy who wiped down the kitchen counter every day and arranged his books in perfect rows. But the Oliver I saw now was nothing like that. I followed him inside, and he just collapsed onto the couch, staring blankly at the TV. He looked completely lost. At first, I didn't know what to say, so I just sat there for a moment, but I couldn't stay still. The mess was overwhelming, so I stood up and started cleaning. I picked up trash, folded his clothes, and did the dishes. The leftovers were a real challenge, like trying to complete an impossible task. While I was doing all this, Oliver didn't even look at me, at least not at first. But after a while, I noticed him watching me. He still didn't say much, but I could tell he appreciated everything I was doing. When I finished cleaning up, I ordered food for us because I knew he hadn't eaten properly. We ate in silence, and I asked him about the breakup. He didn't want to talk about it, but after I convinced him, you should have seen how he broke down. I couldn't believe what I was witnessing. This 33-year-old man crying and muttering incomprehensible words like a child. He told me a little about his breakup, just a few things his lips could barely express. It was heartbreaking, but I was glad I was there for him. Even if all I did was clean or sit with him, I hoped it made him feel like he wasn't alone. Sometimes that's all a person needs, just someone to be there. I listened to him cry, and all I had to do was sit there and offer him a shoulder to cry on, literally. I occasionally apologized, but he didn't want my apology. He told me I wasn't the one who had broken his heart, so I shouldn't apologize for something I didn't do. I asked if I could help him talk to his ex-fiancée, and he told me he believed they were really over because she had blocked him on all sides. I told him that was ridiculous and kept trying to call her. To my surprise, I was also blocked. She clearly didn't want to have any relationship with him or anyone close to him. Seeing that, Oliver became even more emotional, crying harder. I tried to calm him down, rubbing his back and muttering words of comfort. He cried even more and asked me what he had done wrong to lose the love of his life. I pulled him into a tight hug and assured him that he hadn't done anything wrong. Looking back now, I realized that was a mistake because after the hug, Oliver pulled just a few inches away from me and looked straight into my eyes. The words he said shocked me. With tears in his eyes and a hoarse voice, he asked me why we never ended up together. Honestly, I was too stunned to answer, so I just looked at him, completely confused. He kept telling me that we were perfect for each other, that I understood him best, and if we had dated, we wouldn't have broken up. That's when I found my voice and told him to stop saying those things. He didn't mean it. It was just the pain talking. But that didn't stop him. He truly believed we were meant to be, and I just told him he was drunk, which was true. He had been drinking all day. I had to lock the fridge to keep him from getting more, but he refused to accept my judgment on the matter. I looked at the clock and realized it was getting late, so I decided to go home and have dinner with my husband. But as soon as I stood up and told Oliver I needed to leave, he grabbed my arm and said I couldn't leave him alone. I tried to explain that I needed to get back to my husband, that I had promised to come back for dinner. And that's when Oliver said he was afraid he might do something extreme if he was left alone. That night, I didn't know what to do. I felt cornered. I had promised my husband, but just thinking about calling him to say I was going back on my word felt wrong on so many levels. As I was lost in these thoughts, Oliver slumped further into the couch and began groaning, almost like a dog in pain, and that pushed me to the edge. I quickly sat back down and hugged him, asking what was wrong with a voice full of tears. He told me his heart hurt so much, crying like a child, and I instantly forgot about my commitment to Owen. I tried to calm him down and helped him lie down on the couch. Then I grabbed a blanket from his room and covered him to keep him warm. He told me he was cold, even with the blanket, and he was scared to sleep alone. His next request was for me to lie down with him. When he said that, it felt so strange. I'm a married woman, and here I was being asked to lie next to a male friend. I hesitated, but Oliver asked again, and I thought about it. I was just helping a friend, nothing more. Besides, Oliver wasn't a stranger. We had been friends for so long that he felt like a brother to me. He knew my husband, and my husband knew him, so nothing was going to happen. After a moment's thought, I climbed under the blanket with him and hugged him tightly. Maybe that was my second big mistake. We slept on the couch all night, and I could feel him pressing against me the whole time, but I thought it was just natural. I didn't know what it was, but by morning, everything felt strange. I thought about going home, but couldn't bring myself to leave, so I felt like I had done something wrong, even though I hadn't. Oliver seemed a little better the next morning, but he still looked sad. He thanked me so much for being there for him, and I was glad I could help lift his spirits. But that morning, his ex-fiancée sent someone to pick up her belongings, and this sent Oliver into a new phase of depression. He panicked and looked like he was about to explode. He was red in the face and breathing heavily. It was a whole ordeal. I had to prepare a cold bath for him to help calm him down. Afterward, I prepared some food, and when he finished eating, I sat down with him and gave him some advice. I told him he couldn't let his whole life fall apart over this one event. We talked for a long time, and when I saw it was getting late, I told him I needed to leave. I had spent the whole weekend there, and it was time to go home. My husband had asked if I could stay a little longer, but I said no. He told me he understood, kissed me, and that's when it happened. I couldn't believe it when he did that, and I couldn't move. I just sat there and let him do it. After about 6 seconds, he pulled away and looked into my eyes. I wanted to ask him why, but before I could say a word, he kissed me again. This time, the kiss was much more intense than the first one. Maybe it was more intense because it didn't stay on my lips. He suddenly started kissing my neck and groping me, and the truth is I could have pulled away right then, but for some reason, I didn't. I stayed and let it go on for a while before finally whispering for him to stop. I even begged him to stop because I knew I couldn't pull away on my own. He had to stop, or we'd go too far. Luckily, he listened and pulled back. He quickly apologized, and I told him it was okay. As I stood up, said goodbye, grabbed my bag, and left his house, I remember how I felt walking out of there. My mind and body felt disconnected. Even when I waved down a taxi, I did it automatically. The ride home felt truly terrifying because I felt guilty. I kept wishing the driver would slow down, but I couldn't exactly tell him how to drive. So I just sat in silence, waiting. When the taxi finally pulled up in front of my house, the driver had to inform me that we had arrived. Before I could get out of the car, I suddenly realized that my husband didn't know what had happened. He knew I had stayed the night at Oliver's, but whatever had happened between Oliver and me was not something that needed to be discussed. Owen didn't need to know all the details. When I walked into the house, Owen was home, and when I entered the living room, he seemed really angry. He asked why I hadn't answered his calls or texts, and, most importantly, why I hadn't come back the night before like I said I would. His questions hit me like bullets, and it was hard to avoid them. I hadn't even checked my phone the whole time I was at Oliver's place. I quickly checked my purse, and sure enough, there were so many texts from Owen and a missed call. That's when I realized what I had done. I had hurt Owen by leaving him behind and choosing Oliver's feelings over his, even though it wasn't my intention. He kept looking at me, his expression full of disappointment and confusion, and I felt ashamed. This story really shocked me. When I got the call to pick up Owen from the police station, I felt like I was being pushed into a situation I didn't know how to handle. Even when I brought him home, Owen remained silent, not saying a word. That's when the silence started, and it has lasted for weeks. Owen hasn't said anything, hasn't shared his feelings. He just silently endured, and it only made things worse. He stopped eating the meals I made for him, something I'd been trying to do every day as a way to show my care. I used to think, does he know how much it hurts when my husband doesn't eat the food I make for him? It was one of the few things I could do for him, and now he doesn't want to eat it anymore. This really hurts me. I know I made a mistake, but this feeling is slowly eating me up from the inside. And now, Owen is not the person I once knew. He's completely changed. He used to be the kind of person who would come home right on time after work, always leaving the office as soon as his work hours were up, but now it's different. He often comes home late, and that makes me extremely worried. I try to scold him, but nothing changed. He just ignored me and didn't say anything in return. That really makes me angry. Just yesterday, Owen finally spoke a few words for the first time since I messed everything up. But honestly, I would have preferred if he'd stayed silent. What he said really hurt me deeply. I don't know how to react when I hear him say those things. I'd rather he keep being silent, because at least then I could hold on to some hope in my head. I'm exhausted from everything that's been going on. I tried talking to him, suggesting that we should see a therapist, but he just replied that he wouldn't waste money on trying to revive something that's already dead. That statement felt like a knife to my heart when he indirectly said that there's no hope for us anymore. It hurt me so much because I still believe in us. I know I made a huge mistake, but I still believe in second chances. I believe our marriage can still be saved, even if Owen doesn't think so. So, I've decided not to give up. I'll spend all my time and energy trying to fix things so Owen can forgive me. Thank you to everyone who has offered advice and criticism. I know those words come from a place of genuine care and emotion. This will be my final update on this matter. Goodbye. and I wish everyone all the best.